Today we'll be going over the K-Flock case. I'm Rugburn.
And I'm Pickled Landon.
And this is Tombstone Tourist. Alright, so to get into this case, we are going to be showing 3 clips, all kind of just of the day that this incident took place. We're showing these clips because we're going to be giving our opinions on what we think should or could happen and just kind of forming our own opinions, but we also want to give the audience the opportunity to be able to form their own opinions on what they think of the case in case we're showing any kind of bias one way or the other.
We're going to be using the words allegedly and conjecture a lot because this is ongoing. We don't want to come from a place of authority, but we do want to provide everyone with all the facts so that they can come up with their own conclusions.
Let's go ahead and get into it, show the first clip. The first clip is going to be K-Flock allegedly showing what appears to be a pistol tucked in his waistband. And the block that this is taking place on is going to be a rival gang's neighborhood, supposedly.
The ops neighborhood.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and run that clip real quick. And then this next clip is going to be right outside of the barber shop. Now, this clip right here kind of disproves a little bit of what police initially said when they first came out with statements. They said that K-Flock went into the barber shop and asked, "What are you looking at?" These next 2 clips we're about to show are going to disprove the police's initial statements on that fact.
Absolutely.
Now, K-Flock is allegedly the person in the Jordans and the Amiri jeans and the Montclair jacket that just walked by. The victim is the one who just walked out and is approaching K-Flock's direction. And then this next clip shows you a different camera angle. Now, we will be cutting this one a little bit shy because we're not exactly sure how YouTube's going to feel about seeing the aftermath of the situation. If you guys want to check it out, feel free to check it out on your own time. Regardless, we will be cutting it a little shy out of respect kind of for the family, and it might be considered a little graphic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also good to note that this is from the opposite angle. So K-Flock is going to be walking towards us in this clip. And that's him right there, allegedly. And he's turning and he's walking away. And there's the victim.
Now, it is worth noting it does look like he's gripping something or reaching for something. So those are the 3 clips that we're left to work with, right? And just to fill in the dots for you guys, if you choose to not look this up, what happens afterwards is you see the victim roll back. Like,
he's been shot.
Yeah, just roll on the ground. What actually happened was not caught on video, and if it was, it definitely hasn't been released to the public. So the actual possible murder did not take place on camera, just the aftermath. The thing we're going to be talking about is, what do we think is appropriate to happen in this case? Do we think it was self-defense? Do we think it was antagonized? Now, the reason behind the first clip, right, of him showing the gun, it brings into the question, was that antagonizing? Was that necessarily the first thing? And something to keep in mind as well is I don't believe the victim was from an opposing gang or that was even him, because that was a leaked FaceTime call.
It's important to note, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm going to bring that up in here. We're going to talk about self-defense in New York a little bit because that's going to play a huge part in just what's going on here.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know, New York is a very unique place. Yeah, very strict as far as gun laws and self-defense laws go. And I say unique because they're almost an outlier in the whole U.S. Like, it's completely different from anywhere else. They just have their own set of rules that they go by as far as guns and self-defense in general. Yeah,
and I think a lot of that has to do with the density of the city, how many people live there. Speaking of that, I'm going to go into what constitutes self-defense in New York just really quick. So, like you said, you have to feel like you are reasonably about to be attacked, right? On top of that, you also have to feel that you're reasonable in using force to defend yourself. So there's 2 reasonables, okay? So right off the bat, you're dealing with, you're having a little bit of trouble defending yourself in the first place if you can't meet both of those arguments, right? And it states right here, Defending yourself against physical force. There are certain exceptions to the general principle, including combat by agreement or instances where the person seeking to use defense was the initial aggressor or provoked the attack. Now, the clip here in the first one of him being in the neighborhood,
allegedly showing the gun.
And allegedly showing the gun. I don't know how prosecutors would look at this, but it may be seen as instigating the act.
Correct. And the reason that that's kind of gray to me is because he clearly wasn't on FaceTime with the person that was in the barber shop. I wonder how they'll be able to, the prosecutors will be able to kind of go at him for that. Now, it is still a bad look to be taunting someone minutes before a shooting takes place about having a gun on a certain block, right? So that's not a good look to begin with. But if it wasn't at him, I gotta ask, like, do you think that puts him as the aggressor if it wasn't even directed at that person that walked out of the barbershop?
If we're not getting into like the politics of gang violence or this person versus that person, I think based off of this, in most cases, the person using self-defense must reasonably believe. So he came out of the barbershop and it looked like he had something on him, right? Mm-hmm. You must reasonably believe that you're about to be attacked and that what you're about to do to them is reasonable. That's the part where I think he would have trouble, because reacting with violence, there's actually more stuff when it goes into like deadly force. There's more stipulations involved. I don't think he was reasonable in using force immediately.
And I don't think he did use force initially, because if you look at the clip, what happened is he's walking past, he does turn back for a second, but he keeps it pushing, right? Mm-hmm. And then as he keeps it pushing, this guy approaches and he's reaching for something, in which later it's found out that he did have a gun on his person in his pocket, right? Mm-hmm. Say, hypothetically, he's walking up on K-Flock, right? He reaches in his pocket. Since this isn't like on camera, this is all conjecture, but say K-Flock sees it. At this point, he's already tried to walk away. Is it reasonable to assume that he thought his life was in danger at this point?
At this point, I think going by, like, from what we're reading here, he's reasonable, he's reasonable to assume that he's about to be attacked. And if he's going to use physical, non-deadly force after seeing the gun, I think he would be reasonable in that. So I think under those situations, he would have been allowed to attack him physically or stop him from getting shot. But when it comes down to using the weapon and killing him, that adds a whole new, this is part of what makes New York so unique, is it's going to add a whole nother element. Because while lethal self-defense does exist in New York, it's almost non-existent the way it's written.
So he was shot in his neck and in his back. What I think is possible that could have happened is that maybe they reached for each other and in like somewhat of a struggle or physical like kind of tussle situation, K-Flock goes for his waistband, grabs the gun out, pop, and then he ditches it, because what we do know is he did leave the gun on the scene and he left the scene as well, allegedly.
There's nothing that says if an altercation, we didn't see it on camera. If we don't see the altercation on camera, it's still possible to get shot in the back while still being the aggressor. I'm sure it started off as a physical or what appears to be a physical altercation. Weapons are drawn, and if they're in close enough proximity, you know what I mean? Anything can happen. I mean, people have weird trajectory wounds all the time.
And also, we're looking at this in retrospective, right? We have hours and days to think about how we would have handled it, what's right, what's wrong. K-Flock really had like a split second to choose what he was going to do about this situation, because the overall shooting that was not caught on camera happens in what, like 1, maybe 2 seconds. So if you think about it, there was not much thought that could have gone into the whole situation leading to this. And another thing that I think works in his benefit is that even after turning around and looking at the victim, he turns away and keeps it pushing.
Yeah.
At least as far as you can see on camera, right? Now, unfortunately, the part that's not captured on camera is you don't see where the actual altercation takes place, because there's no camera on them at that point.
If we're looking at this with the victim allegedly being the aggressor, and he steps off camera out of frame and raises the weapon, and then so does K-Flock in response. So now it's in response to him raising the gun, and the guy turns. He doesn't pull the trigger, he doesn't commit, and he turns. It's easy to get shot in the back and the neck that way because he's turned to run.
Yeah, so there is that also that possibility too. The reason for those bullet wounds could have been because he saw K-Flock brandish, and then he decides, I don't want a piece of this anymore.
But that's conjecture. Based off what I've seen, I'd have to assume that the victim here is the aggressor in the situation. He caused this to happen. That's why we brought up the first video. We don't know how prosecutors will look at stuff like that, but there's nothing showing the victim in that video.
If you're looking at this case, what do you think? Because I know for me personally, I think it should be counted as self-defense, but it is also hard to say at the same time because you can't see the actual physical altercation portion of this on camera. But the reason I say that is because he didn't go into that barber shop at any point, right?
No.
He was followed out by someone else who was brandishing a firearm. In that, I do think that that's reasonable self-defense. Now, I do think he was in New York, and New York has very strict gun laws. At the time of this, K-Flock was 18. So that's also something to think about. K-Flock should not have even had a handgun in his possession at this time. Being 18, I believe that's 3 years early before you can even own a firearm in New York, or am I mistaken?
You need to be 21 in order to possess a firearm.
Yeah, so he was 3 years off of even being able to own a firearm legally in New York. So they're not in private property, right? They're in public. It's a sidewalk. But New York has very odd laws about that, correct?
They have restricted areas in New York, places where even if you have a permit to carry, you just can't have a weapon there unless there's signage on the place that you're going to. You can have it on your person, in the car, at your home, at the business, but New York has enacted these laws to essentially keep the city safe from gun violence. There's not many, like if you just take a quick glance, any place for worshiper observation, nursery schools, places for mental health, but I've highlighted some ones here that I think are going to throw a wrench in his possible defense. Any place owned or under the control of federal, state, or local government for the purpose of government administration, including courts. I believe that can be stretched to just account for public roads, sidewalk.
Like the sidewalk.
Yeah, and if that doesn't, then it'd be any place, conveyance, or vehicle used for public transportation or transit, subways, cars, trains, railroad, omnibus, etc. I don't think in any shape or form he was legally allowed to have that gun, even if he had been 21.
That is very well a possibility, too, to look into. So either way, this is going to be a sticky situation for him, right? So say he does beat the body and he doesn't get charged with that, right? So there's like a few possibilities. He could get it lowered from a first degree to a manslaughter, and they lower it because they do kind of lean into the self-defense thing. Regardless, I do think he is going to catch a gun charge. I think that's an unavoidable thing, and I think that's one of the reasons that he is not bonded out. I do believe that no matter what, New York's looking at this like you're going to have to sit down for a few years, at least bare minimum, because you were an 18-year-old with gang affiliation on top of that.
I want to bring up that we haven't gotten to the use of deadly force in self-defense. And so I just want to kind of step back a little bit because I do not believe he's going to get off on a self-defense. I don't think it's possible with what's happened here because he used deadly force.
Elaborate a little bit on that.
I'm going to read a little bit of this. This is from Defending Yourself. The above rule applies to the use of physical force. Deadly physical force, which is the type of force that is capable of causing a serious physical injury or death, is not permitted unless a person reasonably believes that deadly physical force is being used or is about to be used on him, herself, or a third person. Pretty much similar to the self-defense thing, right?
Okay.
This is where the clause comes in. Even in such a situation, however, the law imposes on a person the duty to retreat before he or she can resort to using deadly physical force if they can completely retreat within safety.
Where that's questionable is he did turn around and walk away. I think what they're going to question at this point is, did he attempt enough to go away? Because it didn't look like at any point he booked it. He was still walking pretty confidently away. Like, at the same token, he did turn around and keep it pushing.
And I think that's a great argument because that's where things, like you said, get sticky. How do you interpret that language? What is considered retreat?
Because how do you, also, he has like, yeah, that exactly. Like, is that what's required? And then even if that, like, you have to think what's going through his head. Does he want to turn his back on someone? Like, if he did see, now I don't know if he did or not see that the other person was brandishing, right? So if he did see, does he even want to turn away and try to run away like again? Because he's already tried to walk away from it and brush him off, be like, whatever type thing. At least that's what it appears on the video. He was just kind of like, kept it pushing, right? Because I honestly don't think these two even knew each other or had an interaction prior. I do think it could have been a situation of mistaken identity because he's masked up. It's hard to say.
Kind of going back to what you were talking about, in my head, I would have to argue that him turning and acknowledging him, but then turning around and walking away is retreat.
In my opinion, he's trying to defuse the situation in a way. Even if he's like brushing him off like, buddy type situation, that is a way kind of being like, it's not worth it. Let's not get into it. Regardless of if you think it's like respectful or not, how he did it. You know what I mean?
Now, this is where I'm going to tell you why I think that he won't get it. Is because while that can be considered retreat, I think that the prosecutors will probably argue that it's on the second approach is when the deadly violence was threatened. And he didn't retreat at that. He pulled the gun up. I think that's where prosecution will lean, just me personally. I think that the turnaround and the walk away, I think that is retreat, but he didn't see a gun. He just saw the guy come out of the barber shop.
Another thing I think might work against his self-defense is the fact that he ditched the pistol and ran. But then I would have to argue the fact that he might not have wanted, like, even if he thought he was in the right, maybe he just didn't want to catch a pistol charge because he knows regardless that's going to carry some years.
It seems that he knew he wasn't supposed to have it in the first place. Even in the clip, I'm just assuming this, it looks like it's an extended clip. Even the possession of that clip in New York is illegal. You can't have clips that can hold more than 10 rounds. Just in general, that's a charge right there. He's underage, that's a charge. What do you think? Like, what's your opinion? Do you think he can get it on the self-defense?
He might be able to, because the thing that I think his defense lawyer might argue is the fact that, is K-Flock still here had he not used his firearm? Is he still alive in this situation, or did he just become a victim at this point? You know, does he go from the guy who got to walk away but killed someone to being the victim that was left on the sidewalk instead if he doesn't have the firearm on him? I don't know. It's an odd situation. I do think regardless he obviously will have to sit for the pistol time, but it's really hard to tell, because the fact that he kept it pushing really just kind of, you know, it shows an attempt at a retreat, but it also, it's New York, so it really depends. Was it a good enough, and that even sounds bad, but it's like, was it a good enough attempt at retreat, sadly?
And I don't know how their laws work, and I'm just throwing this out there, but do you think that the prosecution will use the fact that if neither of them had had a legal weapon on them, I'm guessing that neither one should have had it, that nobody would be dead? You know, will they use that in there? Because if he had...
I'd argue that was irrelevant, because it's like a situation where they're both already, they have the firearms. It's like a situation of like...
The situation is as it stands.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. What do you think? What realistically, as far as what you think might happen to K-Flock, what would be kind of your educated guess or possibilities?
New York has another one of the things that gives it one of the strictest gun laws in the country is this thing right here, the SAFE Act that they signed into law in 2013. It adds tougher penalties for those who use illegal guns, and it's also to help combat gun violence. It creates minimum sentencing for certain things involving firearms. For using or carrying a firearm in a drug trafficking or in committing of a violent felony, a minimum of 5 years is loaded and 3 if unloaded. We know that his gun was loaded. He's looking at a minimum of 5 years on that, just off that. You know what I mean? That's not with anything else stacking. They can seek a sentence of 25 years, which is an increase from 15 in prosecuting gang members when a gang is involved in murder. I would say he's getting at least on paper 5 to 10 years.
Now, there is also the possibility, though, like I said earlier, that they take the first degree and put it to manslaughter. And then, so it could realistically, and this would still even be a good, not best case, but a good case for him. It's like 2025 still. And then, you know, he gets out early on good behavior type situation because of the enhancement, because of the manslaughter. And that's if they run it at the same time for him.
And I think that plea bargains are still obviously like on the table.
Do you think he'll take a plea bargain?
Given the nature of everything that's happening, in my personal opinion, probably not.
Do you think he'd risk it and take it to trial? Because you do know if they take it, if anyone takes it to trial, they typically, because of the amount of resources the state has to use, or if it's a Fed case, the feds have to use, they do kind of go a little harsher on you when it's taken to trial. So really depends. He is represented by a very like renowned lawyer. I believe his name is Scott Lehman. So, and he's defended a lot of people in the past and gotten people rather lenient deals. I think it depends on the offer they throw him. I think if they offer him 25, I don't think he takes it. Because if they offer him 25, he gets out, his rap career is over.
I think given the unique nature of the evidence, this is just my opinion, because you don't see the actual crime happen on camera. You just have everything built up until then. I think it's a really hard coin flip. Ultimately, I think what'll happen is he'll take a plea deal, but I think there is a possibility of him trying to take it to trial.
Depending on what the plea deal is.
Yeah, and that also depends on eyewitness testimony. We saw that there was a witness in the video. That depends on who talks, who says anything.
Yeah, that's if they even talk too, because we know that there are repercussions for snitching.
Yeah, especially within you know, a situation like this where there's territories, lines drawn, aggressors, and there's a lot of variables to play to like kind of see where it's going to go.
I definitely think we'll have to retouch on this case when everything is said and done, and kind of just, you know, re-go over everything and then look at our view on this in retrospective. But I would really like to know kind of what everyone watching thinks. I'd like for anyone who sees this video to kind of go ahead, leave a comment. Do you think it's self-defense? Do you think that, you know, that he was the aggressor because of the initial video? What are y'all's opinions? What do you think is a fair punishment? Do you think he should get off completely? Just let us know down in the comments below. And, you know, with that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All the good stuff. I'm Rugburn.
And I'm Pickle Landon. Thanks
And
for
this is
stopping by.
And this is Tombstone Tourist.